மேம் இன்னும் கீழே இறக்க முடியுமா சார்? மேம் ஒரு நிமிஷம் மேம் மேம் நான் சொல்றது கேளுங்க, கீழே இறக்குங்க அது லைட்டா. இருங்க இருங்க நான் வரேன். எப்படின்னு ஒரு நிமிஷம், ஒரே ஒரு நிமிஷம். ம், பார்த்து பொறுமையா கொடுங்க சார், கொஞ்சம் ஒரு நிமிஷம். டன் 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 டன். Yes, ma'am.
டாக்டர்
இது ப்ரொஜெக்ட் ஓ ரைட் போடுங்க. இன்டர்நெட் சரி இந்த பக்கம் சார், இது ஆடியோ கிடையாது.
He has co-authored and edited numerous books. These include Black and Race, Respect and Diversity, co-edited with Dr. Colin Lago, Handbook of Social Justice and Psychological Therapies, Power and Politics, Change, edited with Laura Winter, and Trauma Demystified, co-edited with Dr. Matt McFrittridge and Dr. Emma Bradshaw. Welcome, Divine. We're really delighted to have you this morning. I'm very mindful that it's probably 5 a.m. in the UK. Laura, yeah, thank you for joining us so early on.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear us all okay?
We can, just about. There's a bit of an echo, but we can, and it's wonderful to be here this morning.
Each of them are going to spend about 10, 12 minutes talking. I think we'll have some time.
Are we ready to begin? I didn't catch the last thing that was said, sorry. I think I'm going to take that as a yes. You're on mute. I think one of the problems is that we can see you, but the sound is muted for us.
Yes, you can go.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay. Right, I will just share my slides and I will begin. So I hope that you can see those okay. I think I can see them. See what you can see.
We can.
Okay, so I will begin. And yes, it is very early in the morning here, but I'm very grateful to be with you. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm truly honoured, actually, to be asked to speak alongside such esteemed colleagues at such a wonderful, enriching conference. And I've only got a brief amount of time to speak. I think we're all speaking for a short time before we open it up for discussion. But within that time, what I would like to do is reflect on my kind of increasing view that we need to repoliticize social justice. And that need to repoliticize social justice is much more urgent now because of the increasing polarization, division and hate in the world that we live in. This repoliticization, I think, should take the form of a bolder tussling with how politics shapes our well-being, shapes the processes unfolding in the therapeutic relationships that we are involved in, and a clearer engagement with this beginning in the training room. Before getting started, I did want to situate myself briefly because I think this political stance, this kind of political social justice is also reflexive. And I'm a qualitative researcher and firmly of the belief that what I'm going to speak about, both here and in the discussion that we have, is not the single truth, but a truth, something, kind of version of reality which I've constructed that's flawed in all the ways that I am, and that needs to be evaluated as such. So I'm a white cis woman in my late 30s, living and born in the UK with my family. I was saying before, I've got 3 young children and an awful lot of chaos, although my house is quiet for approximately the next 45 minutes to an hour. In higher education, I've seen and felt the impacts of being a young-ish woman in a system that's not designed for me, and one with caring responsibilities who chooses to prioritise family, sometimes at the expense of my career. But I benefit from multiple socially structured advantages. And I think growing up, I didn't realise how much these shape not only my experiences, but my understanding of those. And it took me a while to realise that my kind of deep-rooted caring of the world, for the world, my interest in the social and the political, was at all connected to my interest in the psychological and in well-being. And when I first approached this, I didn't realise how personal it would become. And learning that the personal is political has been quite the journey, and I still learn and I still get it wrong. My own work on social justice began in 2010, building on many who'd come before me and whose shoulders I continue to stand on. And at that point, most of the writing on social justice as a term in counselling psychology, the field I'm based in, and in other psychological professions, was from North America. But since then, I've seen a boom in the UK in what I would call mainstream psychology and psychotherapy research, writing and training, which makes the connection between what we do and our articulated social justice values. We had a long history of work on multicultural counselling, anti-oppressive practices, and I was interested in what this kind of so-called social justice agenda could mean for counselling psychology and allied professions. And in a 2013 paper, I defined social justice. It was a paper in which I reviewed the available literature at the time, and I defined it as both a goal of action and the process of action itself, which involves an emphasis on equity or equality for individuals in society in terms of access to a number of different resources and opportunities, the right to self-determination or autonomy, and participation in decision-making, freedom from oppression and balancing of power across society. As well as perhaps noticing the kind of unnecessary wordiness in this, you'll also notice the absence of any explicit mention of the political. Fairness, equity, and freedom are all ideas which are politically structured and need to be understood as such. But this isn't something that I included consciously or explicitly within my understanding of social justice. And looking back, I know it was there, but for whatever reason, I chose not to say that part out loud. A few years prior to this, when I spoke to psychologists who had an active interest in and engagement with social justice about what it meant to them and what it looked like, they told me that for them, there was a big fit between what they do and social justice, but they didn't see that as something that was shared with the broader profession. They felt like it was a concern they held, but not all others held in their profession. It wasn't something at the core of what they were doing, and that action around social justice as a practitioner psychologist was really difficult. So they talked about issues and barriers to engaging in social justice action in their roles, like time and a lack of training. Now, since the early 2010s, there's been a big growth, as I say, in the literature, which has social justice at its fore. And similarly, we've also now got an overwhelming amount of research in psychology, which documents what are known as social determinants of mental health, some of which you can see listed on the slide here. This rise in social justice research and writing, alongside our greater understanding of the social factors which underpin our clients' distress, is reassuring and can really only be taken as a kind of cause for celebration. But I would argue that simply acknowledging the social determinants of mental health and the broader environmental context does not equal adopting a social justice approach, because you can do the former in an apolitical way. So to illustrate this distinction further, I'll use an analogy that I've drawn on before. And interestingly, this is going to work far better for me than you, because I'm in a very, very cold house in Derbyshire in the UK. But picture a really large room in your mind with lots of different people in it. They're stood and sat in different groups and on their own all over the space. And the room is absolutely horribly freezing cold. And everybody is really feeling that. The room's cold for a variety of reasons. Let's say there's some broken windows. There's a problem with the heating as the main factors. Needless to say, everyone's feeling pretty miserable, and their well-being isn't at all good. It does vary from person to person, though. Those with underlying health conditions or those who are older or younger respond and feel the cold differently, and their mood shifts as such. Those with thicker coats or the ability to run around more might feel a little better than those without access to those things, especially those who might have to occupy spaces near broken windows. Now, if you've got someone in to help support the well-being of the people in this room, like a psychologist, I think historically the main approach taken by them would be to look at the individual explanations for distress, albeit with a recognition of the cold as, say, context for their experience. So we might see the psychologist consider, for example, someone's negative thinking and their thinking patterns about being cold as something to address that might help them manage their situation a bit better. They might look at their relationships in the room and how these are impacted by their relationship history and how this is feeding into their current experience of being quite miserable. Now, with the increasing emphasis on social justice, we're seeing psychologists also recognise that they should explicitly include the social determinant, in this case, the freezing cold room, into their formulations. And they should consider writing to someone and asking for the heating to be turned up or for the broken windows to be fixed, as well as exploring with that individual how they're coping and to how to find other individual responses that might help. So we are seeing that shift. It's very clear and not particularly new. But we still call them social determinants of mental health. And we still create, I think, an artificial divide between politics and social justice or politics and therapy. We acknowledge the way that environmental factors shape our mental health, but we do not acknowledge the way in which our environment itself is constructed, and thus neglect the true meaning of the personal as political. So returning to this cold room, yes, therapists are thinking about the broken windows and the heating, but they aren't thinking about or asking questions about who controls the heating, why it's not turned up, who gets to decide or fund the fixing of the broken windows. Sure, they're looking to these environmental factors, but they're still often viewing them through an apolitical lens, perhaps because of the way the profession itself is constructed. And so I think much of this massively increased body of work on social justice does not tussle with the existence of these social determinants of mental health. Indeed, in calling them social rather than political, we frame them as things which just happen naturally, without human intervention or cause. We aren't properly questioning the existence of structural racism or economic inequalities. We're just acknowledging that these things exist and that they cause psychological harm. Liberation psychology and the principle of denaturalization would encourage us to question this and to understand that these things do not just need to be. And the risk here, I think, of obscuring and ignoring the political nature of social justice is that as a term and as an idea, it becomes meaningless, potentially. Another way for us to say that we're doing things without actually doing anything at all. 15 years ago in the UK, Gillian Proctor wrote an article about the depoliticisation of diversity in counselling. And I think we're seeing this potentially the same shift around social justice. And the current climate we live in, I think the risk is heightened and the need for psychologists and psychotherapists to face this and become bolder is more urgent. So I didn't catch all of the introductions of us earlier on as the panel, but I heard the end of the introduction of my marvellous colleague, Divine Charura, who you'll hear from shortly. In 2023, when we edited the Handbook of Social Justice and Psychological Therapies, we essentially updated my understanding and definition of social justice and unpacked some core elements of this in practice. And we suggested when we were talking about what this looks like in practice is that social justice is ethical, it's transformative, and it is political. So we wrote it in from the start, which I think makes quite a big difference. But the political nature is not something people find easy. In 2021, I asked practitioners about this and found that people were unsure about how to handle issues around ethics and politics in therapy and didn't always feel equipped to know how to respond to politics in the therapy room. And more recently, you'll see from the quote on the slide from a participant in a project done by Nicola Farrar at Manchester. She found that therapists still struggle with politics, this time when asked specifically about culture wars in therapy. Questions were raised about whether politics really belongs in therapy, and practitioners felt it was really challenging territory that they weren't equipped to manage. The quote on the slide is from a participant who's talking about their own experiences of training in relation to this. And they said that there was nothing there. There was nothing there about the political positions. There was nothing there about how to understand our own political views, others' political views, and how these interact and shape things. And similar themes, again, were found in another project I've done around talking to practitioners who were implementing public policy. Issues of training keep coming up, and issues of, yes, we have something useful to add here, we have something useful, we can think about how we contribute to this debate further, but we don't think we're currently equipping people to know how to manage that best. So I think the need to repoliticize social justice is urgent, and I think we should begin with training. practitioners need to tussle with what politics and therapy really looks like. So this isn't about telling people who to vote for. It's not about bringing politics into the therapy room because it's already there. The space you occupy, the space your client occupies, and the relational space between is politically structured and shaped. In our training programs, we need to develop confidence in approaching politics, noticing how and where it's shaping things, how we can ethically and relationally approach that, not with fear, not with judgment, but with open curiosity and an understanding that the personal is political. Okay, I'm going to stop there and hand over to one of my very esteemed colleagues who's going to talk a little bit more on the topic.
I just jump in. I think all the intros were done and
I think all the intros were done. I would jump
to-
in. And thank
Okay.
you, everyone. I could see some lovely applause then. It's very strange seeing and not hearing.
It is. Okay. Does that look okay on the screen? Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Laura. So interesting. And I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have afterwards. So yeah, it's great to be here with everyone. I'm on the other end of Laura and Divine's schedule. It is 11 p.m. here in Canada. So bear with me if I'm going to try to pep it up, but it is a little late. I'm excited to talk to you about social justice, but on the research side of things, with the hope of having conversation about how to elevate community-based research. So I want to thank the organizers for having us, and I wish I could be there in person, but it'll have to be at the next conference. So a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to make sure I'm mindful of time. I'll just position myself with respect to the presentation, go over a few key definitions, look at why community-based research is so important, and touch on a methodology that we've been using in our research in the past 5 years, that of arts-based engagement ethnography, and then wrap up with some implications. So just quickly, I am coming to you from Calgary, Alberta in Canada right now, which is located on Treaty 7 territory, but there have been multiple spaces in Canada and the US that have informed my learning where I've studied and worked. And beyond that, I have an interesting history of immigration, which has also informed the work that I do. And so that's coming from places where you are right now, but also other places in the world. So for the sake of time, I'll move quickly through that, but happy to discuss positionality and colonialism with you during the Q&A. Very briefly, I talk about folks who are historically, persistently, and systemically marginalized as an umbrella term. The language has shifted over the years, and really, this is the language that's used at the university that I'm at currently, and really looking at groups that have been and continue to be marginalized, and how research has been harmful to those groups. In terms of social justice, I think aligning with Laura's understanding, looking at both the process and the goal of the research. And finally, decolonization, the importance of, reattributing power, and hence in this context the importance of doing community-based research as opposed to research on certain communities, which has been psychology's history. So briefly, in terms of the historical context for the conversation that we're going to have today, I think it's pretty clear that our field, psychology, counseling psychology, has been positivistic in nature. It has been very comparative in nature, claimed objectivity, neutrality, things like that. And this is particularly important when we're talking about research with HPSM groups, because that research is often cross-cultural, where a certain marginalized group is compared to a dominant group, and it creates a deficit-based kind of dynamics in the research. And we know that there's been multiple harms done to various HPSM communities, and psychological research has been part of those harms. Just some examples, with doing research on groups as opposed to with groups, and this applies often to Black and Indigenous folks. And if you think of some of the history in our field of how IQ testing, why it was developed, how it was developed, slavery, diagnosis of queer folks, which is still in the DSM today, torture of folks, which again, recent phenomenon. So even though we're supposedly learning from our history, psychology and psychological research continues to be used to weaponize folks who are marginalized. So as an antidote to that, one of the important pieces to consider is, can we do research that is driven by community, which means prioritizing community knowledge, community priorities, looking at research that is beneficial to communities in real time, not 5 years later when we publish an article, looking at the ethical and relational nature of the work. And thinking about research, for me, it's thinking about research as an intervention, even though it's not necessarily a psychological intervention per se, but looking at how can we be helpful to folks in real time. And there are multiple approaches to participatory research, so we can have a whole panel on that. But some of the commonalities among different participatory approaches include the fact that it is rarely initiated by the researcher. Ideally, it's initiated within the community. We want to emphasize meaning making and lived experience, being flexible, contextual, and culturally sensitive, and leading with relational ethics, as opposed to our typical Western code of ethics, who have which often position some of the participatory research as problematic in terms of looking at dual roles, or even the way that we should engage in neutral ways with our participants, if you will. So I will talk to you a little bit about an approach that I've developed with a colleague. That we did this when she was in Canada, but she's currently in Scotland. She's relocated. And Suzanne is a nurse and an anthropologist, and I'm a psychologist and a bunch of other things as well. So kind of brought together our knowledge to kind of look at how can we do research that's community driven, and that also is meaningful and provides an intervention in real time to folks. So very briefly, ABE, which is art-based engagement and ethnography, is influenced by critical ethnography. It's a form of rapid ethnography in the sense that we're not spending a year or two hanging out with our research collaborators, but it is still an entailed process. It's centered around a phenomenon, and it has some arts-based influences. We do a lot of research with, again, HPSM communities, often immigrant communities, and so having an artistic component reduces the reliance on language. Maybe, how am I per time? I will just quickly mention that the goal of ABE is to look at not just the individual experience, but also the group experience, and then also the systemic influences that are often harming people or at least influencing them. In terms of rapid ethnography, as I mentioned, we're really looking at collecting data over 8-ish weeks versus a prolonged period in the field. The focus of the inquiry is on a particular phenomenon in a culture sharing group, but the more participatory you make ABE, the more these foci can shift based on what the community is asking for or needing. And then the arts-based influences at it, as I mentioned. So here's just an example of how we have used ABE, centering on the phenomenon of school integration among newcomer youths in one designated high school. This is how it kind of comes together. Quickly, the process looks like what you see on the screen. Essentially, I think I break it down here. I do. Okay. So just kind of a quick overview. Phase 1, which you see at the bottom arrow here, is roughly 6 to 12 weeks. And then a year later, we can do follow-up to track progress or the evolution of experiences. So in the first phase, which is the first square on your screen here, looking at cultural probes, we provide participants or research collaborators with a bunch of arts-based materials. And each of these materials come with questions. For example, probes of what they might be journaling about, maps of identifying areas where they feel comfortable navigating or where they maybe not feel safe. And also camera, asking them to document their daily experiences. So in this way, in a true ethnography, we'd be hanging around with the newcomer youth all day and following them around. In this case, they're documenting their experience throughout the day. And again, the more participatory we make this, the more participants can select their own cultural probes, whatever art they want to create, whatever probes they want to work with, and whatever prompts they want to use to document their experiences. Once they've used their probes to create artifacts, we kind of do a synthesis of those artifacts and use those to lead the individual qualitative interviews with each person. So you see here examples of a journal entry and of a map that a participant completed. And so rather than going in with each person and asking them the same set of qualitative interview questions, each interview is tailored based on the artifacts that the person created. And when each participant, usually their groups are small, 5 to 10 people, when each participant has done a qualitative interview, we look at what experiences were shared among those 5 to 10 participants, and then we run a series of planned discussion groups to get the more collective experience in the group. Follow-up, we go through the same process for those interested. It is actually pretty fascinating how little attrition we have with this method, which is not the assumption I would have had going into it. But folks really enjoy the process and they share their experiences with us, and they come back for follow-up. And also, I will spare you the details of the data analysis. You can look that up in some of our articles. But we're looking at multiple sources of data to kind of highlight people's lived experiences. So we find that pretty interesting in terms of what comes out of the artifacts, interviews, and group discussions. Multiple means of rigor, again, those pieces you can look up. We've used this methodology with different epistemologies in mind, and so that also can shift because depending on the need of the community and what position they're coming from, what phenomenon they want to look at, using a different epistemology will shift how we do the research. And this shows up at different stages of the research, but also mostly when we're doing data analysis. Here's an example of what we used with our project with newcomer youth, is really zoom into the data to look at specific questions like equitable opportunities for engagement within the school, and how students kind of experience issues of equity or inequities within their local context. So again, if you shift your epistemology based on who you're working with, you'll shift the way that you look and zoom into the data. And briefly, I'll just share a few factors to consider. I think whether you're using ABE or another participatory method, the importance really, I think, is to lead with reflexivity, to reconsider the role of a researcher. A lot of our training in psychology looks at very traditional positivistic ways of doing research. And so this requires a shift, and really the necessity to integrate social justice into the curriculum, and even politicize that. I think, Laura, you've kind of made that point very clear, and it's an important one. And so really to enhance equity, diversity, inclusion, decolonization, and accessibility throughout the research process. And I think I've covered my time. In conclusion, I think it's important to consider how foundational social justice is to counseling psychology, but how we also need to continue to push and shift to ensure that our research, which informs all other aspects of our work, is truly community driven and helps reduce harms among HPSM communities. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Anusha and Laura, and very good morning to everyone. My name is Divine, and it's great to be here and to see you all. And it's a pleasure. Thank you to the organizing committee for this wonderful invitation. I'll now just share my my screen with you. Let's just see if I can do that straight away. Please do let me know when you can see it. Laura, can you see my screen, or Nisha? Thank you.
If you're not in, if you click share your slides, then they'll be on your full screen. Now we see your slides and your desktop.
Yeah, that's right. That's fine. Let's try that. There we go. Is that okay? We good? Okay, so wonderful morning. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll go straight in on account of the time. And it was lovely to see colleagues like Roy earlier this morning waving to us. Thank you. I really wish I could be there with you all, but we couldn't make it this time. So the title of my talk is Weathered Bodies, Resistant Lives, and taking a critical perspective on injustice, trauma, and embodiment. And before I just exited, let's try again. Before I speak to this, I'd like to just situate myself. I work at York St. John University, which is in the north of England. Most people might not know where York is, but when you mention Manchester Football Club, most people will nod. Anywhere I go in the world will nod or will smile or not. So we're about 2 hours away from Manchester, and Laura actually works in Manchester. So, here we have an Institute for Social Justice, and I have a passion for social justice. I was really privileged to co-edit a book with Laura, which Laura has already spoken about. And I always believe we're standing on the shoulders of giants, of many other colleagues who've been writing and thinking and researching about social justice. I am of African heritage, and so in my orientation, I really believe in the collective, the power of coming together and working together. And this is a picture I always share of my mother and my father, my children, my wife, and my brothers and sisters, and my brother-in-law. I could go on to talk to you about that, but I won't. But this really is a position from which I go out into the world and find solace in a place of safety where I can come to talk about my lived experiences. I was deeply touched and privileged to be able to visit India at least 4 times since I think maybe from about 2005 till about 2013. And we used to do trips where we would come to India with students to learn about difference and diversity. And what always struck me was, for the first time, many of our students began to think about their own difference, their own privilege, their own skin color when they were amongst other wonderful people who were different to them. And for the first time, you could see them begin to think about injustice, to learn about the history of colonization, its impact. And that was the same for me. And I have very fond memories of India. But the other thing that struck me was to be open to different ontologies and Indian psychology, the different faiths, the different people coming together, and in the way of learning therapy that we always taught Eurocentric psychology. But here we were faced with having to wonderfully think about a different orientation. So I'll go straight in then to my talk, having done that. And I'll start by saying, over the recent decades, evidence from neurobiology, from medicine, from psychology, from social sciences has really illuminated for us how social justice is not only structural, but is also embodied. And it leaves tangible marks on those who endure systemic inequalities. And what I'd like to do is to talk to you about the body and some of the research that myself and colleagues have done, including my big shout out to my colleague, Dr. Charlie O'Brien, with whom I've done research on this, and other colleagues. It's great to see Roy and Dion and Keisha and others who are doing this work around the body. And critical scholars from different fields have shown that oppression is inscribed in the body through racialization, through discrimination for gender, sexuality. And what I'm wanting to bring is a reclaiming of embodiment, our bodies as a site of resistance. And I'll start by going back to one of the civil rights movement leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And here is a quote from Arlen Geronimus. And the pathologist who performed Dr. Martin Luther King's autopsy noted he had the heart of a 60-year-old, although he was 39 when he died. And his damaged heart was duly noted in the official records as a curiosity, but there's no question that the cause of his death was homicide, assassination, a hate crime. But the fact that he lived continuously on alert to threats, his body was always heightened, on maintaining his composure against attacks, on being in survival mode. This chronic vigilance and adaptation takes a huge toll on the health of us as human beings. Then I'd like to go to think about the 4 main theoretical foundations. I'm only drawing from 4 main embodiment theories. These are theories around the body and nonverbal communication, what happens in our bodies when we introject oppression, when we introject discrimination. And you can draw from the many different theories that you are familiar with. And this goes back, certainly in the West, we would go back to Descartes, we'll go to Lemma, we'll go to other colleagues like Lacan. We also have traumatology theories, and these are theories about how overwhelming events can disrupt the psyche and indeed cause problems and manifestations in the body. We have theories that talk about somatic experiences and that mind and body are interconnected. It's not just the mind and then the body, but there's an interconnection. And I was really pleased to be in Canada with Roy and colleagues last year, and to hear some of the work that they're doing alongside some of the work we're doing on decolonized and social justice perspectives on trauma in the body. And you can see drawing from the work of Frantz Fanon and the work that other colleagues are doing. And I see on the program that Dion we're running, or did already run some workshops on the body, and that's really wonderful. So what I'd like then to bring is the argument that why is the impact of social injustice on the body? If we had time, we would then have a discussion and people would be able to speak to that. But what we do know is that discrimination and stress and the constant stress hormones in our body impact our immune function. It increases cardiovascular strain on our hearts. We've given there an example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It disrupts the metabolism in our body and insulin regulation. It impairs our memory and function and increases our susceptibility to chronic pain and inflammatory conditions. And ultimately, it impacts us by shortened life expectancy and early onset of age-related illness. So social justice, therefore, is impacting not just the mind, but the body. Here is a table that just summarizes that, the neurochemical impact, the chemical on our immune system, on our metabolic function, and what we call the allostatic load, which is the multi-system of wear and tear from repeated stress. There's also an epigenetic and aging impact, as we've said, and the term weathering has been described by Dr. Geronimus, Arlen Geronimus. And this is the higher chronic disease and burden and reproductive complications and shortened life expectancy that emerge from experiencing the challenges that we do. So how do we look at this in our research? It was good to hear you, Anusha, talk about your own methods in terms of research. We tend to use body maps, and body maps is a guided visual narrative process in which we ask people to color in a body map the experiences. Then we can fit this into online platforms, for example, Gorilla, and look at the experience that people are having. And you've seen there, it was wonderful, I said, to hear Dion and Roy talk about their own experiences in looking at bodies with their work, and a chapter that's coming out, I think, Moodley and Green, in a book that I've just done with Charlie O'Brien, in which they talk about going beyond decolonization and thinking about the body, the work of Lauri Numena, which is essential in thinking about maps and using the software that we do use. I'd just like you to look for a moment, and this is study participants. This is Numena. Look at anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, and surprise, and how people colored this experiences. But you can also look at depression, you can look at pride, you can look at shame, and the different perspectives that people brought. So in our research, and there's a QR code there, you'll be able to get some of the research that we've done on body mapping, on working with refugees and asylum seekers who've been tortured. Here are examples of what people said, and you can see one participant wrote on a body map in physical, mental, emotional pain, ribs pain, needle pain that comes and goes. And this really begins to say, so how do we work with this? Will psychotherapeutic interventions that are about talking be the answer? Or do we need to think about other interventions? Here is an example, and I think one of the PhD students I've got, Caroline Rowe, and we're doing a study on stigmatization and loneliness. And you can see this is one participant we just recently spoke about pain in the heart, sadness, feeling empty. And then they say it's dangerous because it triggers images and experiences that are negative from the past. This is another study I'm doing with women who speak about experiencing misogyny and discrimination. And I feel numb and cold in my joints. I get a pit in my stomach. And I'd like you to think in different cultures, we will have different metaphors for describing what we experience in our bodies. I start to panic. I get unexplained bleeding and my feet are frozen. This is about really thinking about the body. And so the question that I'd like to bring is, what are our own bodies and what's your own body telling you as a site of resistance to social injustice? and to trauma and to experiences that you face. So in concluding, because likely time for us to have a discussion with my colleagues and with yourselves, you'll have the time to do that. Our social justice interventions, therefore, must be understood as mechanisms of repair and distribution. Repair in the body, what can we do to this multifaceted impact? And from a contemporary critical standpoint that is decolonized, that is culturally sensitive, embodied approaches are not simply ethical imperatives, but actually they're biopolitical interventions that help us to reshape health, to think about longevity, because we spoke about shortened lifespan and dignity, by confronting the body as well as the root causes of inequality. So I think I'd like to hold it at that. Thank you. There's a lot of literature that you can look at. Some of the books are done with Laura and colleagues, and I thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen at that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Different perspectives, but thinking about social justice beyond what aspiration. We've got some time to take some questions, and we've also got first question from dear friend Ron, who's going to start the discussion and ask the questions. And then we also have some time to take some questions from the audience. That's the format. Hope you can hear us all okay. I see some.
I didn't quite get that. I don't know about my colleagues, but I didn't quite hear you.
No, the sound quality is. Maybe try say again. We've just really missed what you said.
Okay. There's a brilliant presentation. Social justice, thinking about that, and I watch on different perspectives, how important so action, process, all of that, and then we need to discuss that. And there's one question, so we're all not very clear, we've got you guys to start the discussion, and then we will be taking some questions from the audience. So, did that come across, Laura?
I think I heard that you mentioned the word question, but I didn't hear any question.
No,
I was straining, I'm sorry.
Question hasn't come to you yet, so we've got a question first. Roy, would you want to ask the question?
Okay, before I start, please see all these speakers. Yeah. We're trying to solve out the technology.
Yes. We're trying to have you all on the screen together.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Brilliant. I was sitting with the chair, and the chair is there. I'm here because just in case the technology went off, and I was told to address the questions that you wrote abstracts. I'm glad you came, so I don't have to do that. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for staying up so late. And I've asked you to ask the first question because if anybody else asked you some very intense and questions that challenge the issue around social justice, you could have just mixed up. I know you won't do that. I don't know whether you guys can hear me.
Roy, just to say, the sound quality is so poor, we're only getting a part of what you are. But I wonder whether if there's colleagues at the computer or laptop, if they can type out the essence, if you can hear us, then we'll be able to see the chat. Thank you.
I have a question you can make, but we put it in the chat as well. Is that okay with you?
That's great. That's great. Yeah, in the chat, we can see the chat. Thank you.
I was saying thank you for putting the presentation. We covered so so much of the area, and so much complex and quite a hypothetical and people work. So my question is, how can you take or leaders in a discipline that has curated the inferiority complex that was the architect of racism and homophobia and has been a close cousin of eugenics? How could we understand social justice, injustice in the clinic room with this kind of history and background?
We partly heard that. How can we understand social justice in the clinic room? Given the history, that's a bit that we got, but we'll wait for the chat and we can see the question. Thank you.
I was about to ask you, Divine, whether you heard better than I did. I heard part of it. How can we? Okay,
Thank you.
so
You got that in the chat. Laura, do you want to go ahead? Thank you.
yeah, I was just going to say, so the essence of this question, I guess, is about how can we do any of this, really care about any of this when we are a profession with such an oppressive history and present, perhaps less so than historically, but still there. And I think it's a brilliant question, and it's one I ask myself fairly regularly, if I'm honest. And I was writing something recently about counseling psychologists as change makers, and I was thinking, can counseling psychologists even be change makers? Is this just something that we're going to call ourselves to make ourselves feel good, but we're not going to do anything? I mean, I think it starts with examining ourselves and the discipline. I don't think we can do it if we miss that step. And I think we also need to acknowledge our limits. So it's not all about counseling psychology or counseling or psychotherapy coming in and saving the day. This isn't something to make ourselves feel good or absolve ourselves of any guilt. You know, we need to acknowledge our complicity as an important part of it. And yeah, I do think that's really challenging to do, but I think we have to start from that position. I don't think we can say the discipline is oppressive and therefore we should just not try. I think we should look at ourselves first and foremost.
Yeah, well, I thank you, Laura. Whenever this question emerges in myself or in others, I like to go to the idea of a paradigm shift. And I think of one paradigm shift we can have is the shift around the Earth and the belief system that all the planets evolved around the Earth. But when the questions were asked, why are we not falling off the edge of the Earth? There was resistance, right? They would have had professors on geometry and celestial bodies and so on. But the key question that comes in the science of paradigm shifts is when you notice that there is something that is different, you have to ask different questions. You have to come up with different methods. And I think we need to do the same in our professions. Is we have to ask questions that are different from the questions we've always asked. We have to have power with those who've been subjugated, who've been marginalized, so that we can hear their voices. And that's an approach that is power with rather than power over. And lastly, this is where the decolonization piece is important, because it is about challenging the status quo and having, and this is why it's so wonderful to see this conference in India, is to hear other ontologies and bodies of knowledge as equal knowledge generating partners to challenge the status quo. So I think it's a great question. And I think these are the things we need to do on our journey. Thank you. Anusha?
I don't know if I can add much. I'm not very optimistic in this area, but I do resonate with a lot of what you're talking about. Like, we can't not try, and we have to learn from different epistemologies. And something practical that I've been doing recently, I don't know how successful it's been, but because there's so many conversations around decolonization happening at the institutional level, some might argue that it's performative, but every time I'm told, no, we can't do this because it's a university rule, it's a university policy, this won't work, then I kind of push back with, well, this doesn't match the decolonization agenda that we have. Again, not sure where that's going, but I think even the concrete steps of like putting that back on the table constantly, even if the solution isn't there yet, but highlighting it as many times as possible, is important if we're supposedly in this era of decolonization. Yeah.
I'm just going to have to jump in just whilst you're taking more questions. Apologies, just because we're running slightly over, I'm going to have to make sure I go and attend to my small children who are waking up. So I'm going to leave answering the questions now to Divine and Anusha. I've spoken to about that before, so I know that that's okay. But I'm so sorry. I hope it was a useful conversation. And if anyone wants to reach out with any questions afterwards, please do drop me an email. Take care, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to see you. Thank you. So the question, can you tell more about body mapping as a diagnostic method to understand if social justice is causing damage to the body? Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Well, we couldn't hear what you said. Sorry, I'm not sure if the mic is working. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for the question. So, the evidence that we have from medicine, public health, certainly with where I am situated, demonstrates health disparities and differences between those who are marginalized, those who are living in poverty, those who experience discrimination and hardship, certainly showing that they have a lower life expectancy, certainly showing that they present with more complex embodied difficulties, such as chronic pain, such as psychological difficulties, unexplained medical symptoms. So I worked for a long time in a hospital in which we would have people presenting with different challenges in their body, and the medical neurologist would say there is no medical reason why this should be the case. And so we turned to body mapping as a method to offer us a counter narrative to really learn from the person, what are they experiencing in their body. In working with marginalized populations, refugees, asylum seekers, people who've experienced discrimination, we noticed that what they report in their bodies, and it's a method that allows us to have power with the other person as they speak about their own body without a top-down approach. So as a method, really, it's not about it being a diagnostic method, but it's a way of us having conversation, of opening up the dialogue, noticing what the person is experiencing in the body. Lastly, I think with Roy and Dion being there and Keisha, they'll be able to talk to you about some of the presentation, the work that they've done in mapping, using body maps from their own perspective. And I would encourage you to think about your own work, your own bodies, where you feel experiences within yourself. Thank you. I'm sorry, we can't hear. If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Wonderful presentation, and thank you for answering the question. For the mic, we will have to, because we don't have any more time, so we take one question. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's much.
Thank you very much.
We will have a really big time.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you.
Have a great conference.
Have a wonderful conference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. UK soon with our next conference.
Members and the chairperson, Dr. Destiny and Dr. Ryan Murphy, thank you for joining us today. A small announcement: the lunch will be served for all the keynotes in Bollywood Spirituality Center, and for the delegates in professional therapy, the lunch will be served in the conference pavilion. After the lunch, the confidence sessions will be after the keynote. Global